all the tears that was on.
When I later on became addicted, all of that flashback on me is like, why did she tell me that?
What was the terrible secret that Etta James took to her grave? Did she hide something from the world that even her fans didn't know about? Many people loved her voice and her music, but what if there was more to her story?
You had a quote, "I was a fool, smart enough to know I was a fool, dumb enough not to care. Now that's a real fool."
What could this secret be, and why did she keep it hidden for so long? Let's look at the details of Etta James's life and the secret she died with. Born in Los Angeles, California, but her early years were filled with hardship. Her mother, Dorothy Hawkins, was just a teenager when she had Etta. Dorothy was very young and often didn't know how to take care of her daughter. She would leave Etta with other people, sometimes for months at a time. Etta was so lonely and hurt by her mother's absence that she called her the Mystery Lady. Etta even described her mother as a crazy nightmare in her book because Dorothy would come back into her life only to leave again. Etta felt afraid and unsure of where her mother was. She often cried, hungry and scared that no one would find her. This feeling of being abandoned stuck with Etta for many years.
And as a child, my mother is a real jazz lover and everything, and so I had been through those same experiences.
Because of her mother's repeated abandonment, Etta grew up with a lot of negative feelings. As she got older, she went to therapy to try to understand these feelings. Etta later said that the sadness and loneliness she felt helped her find music. She believed that if her mother had stayed with her, she might not have become the famous singer she became. In a way, her pain pushed her to become a singer. It was the one thing that helped her cope with everything that was happening.
Say that your mother would tell you different stories about who your dad was.
Right.
But at one point she pointed at the TV, said, "Minnesota Fats, that's your dad. You saw the resemblance, and tell me what it was like when you finally ran into him in 1987.
During the times when her mother was gone, Etta stayed with other people, including her aunt and some foster parents. One of her foster parents, named Lula, was kind to her, but her foster father, Jesse Rogers, was cruel. Etta often had to sing for his friends when he came home drunk. If she refused, he would beat her with a razor strap. She hated singing in front of people because of these painful experiences. Etta later said that this forced singing was the reason she didn't like doing encores. She would be forced to stand there in her pajamas, humiliated and tired, singing songs she didn't like. It was a painful memory that stayed with her for years. Even though Etta loved singing, her foster father, Sarge, didn't let her learn music in a healthy way. He tried to control everything about her music lessons. At the age of 10, he even pulled her out of a church where she had been learning to sing. Etta was heartbroken because she loved singing at the church, and it was one of the few places where she felt good. Losing this opportunity made her feel very sad and alone. When Etta was about 12 years old, her foster mother, Mama Lou, died from a stroke. After Mama Lou's death, Etta's biological mother, Dorothy, came to take her to San Francisco. Dorothy didn't let Etta say goodbye to her friends or pack her things. She just took her and left. Living in San Francisco didn't make things any better. Dorothy was still not around much, leaving Etta alone without food or care. This lack of attention made Etta feel even more abandoned, and she started to skip school. Instead of going to school, she spent her time with a local gang called the Lucky 20s. Etta and the gang would steal costume jewelry, sell it, and use the money to buy blues records. Music became a way for her to escape her painful life. At school, things weren't any better. Etta faced bullying from both black and white students because of the way she looked. Her skin was light, and that made her a target for other kids. This bullying made her angry and frustrated. Etta didn't just sit back and take it. She fought back and even hurt some of the other students. She once broke a girl's arm. Because of her bad behavior, she was sent to a special school for children who had trouble following the rules. This made Etta feel even more like an outsider. She began to see herself as a tough street kid who didn't fit in anywhere. She had a mother, but Dorothy wasn't there for her. This feeling of being alone made Etta even more determined to survive and find her way.
But it was the best I could do under the circumstances, I guess.
Etta's early life was filled with pain, loneliness, and confusion. But even though she faced so many struggles, she didn't give up. Music was the one thing that helped her cope with the difficulties she faced. Later in life, she would become one of the most famous and respected singers of her time. Her powerful voice and songs about love, pain, and hope spoke to people all over the world. Even though her childhood was tough, Etta James showed the world that strength can come from the hardest experiences.
Oh, he's a young woman. It's a 17-year-old woman, and she's big and bad enough to be out on this tour. She's also big and bad enough to get into trouble.
She turned her pain into something beautiful and unforgettable.
I remembered when I later on became addicted, all of that flashed back on me. Is like, why did she tell me that?
Etta behind the scenes, she had a big problem. She was addicted to heroin, a dangerous drug that took over her life. When she first tried heroin, she made a terrible mistake. The heroin she took was white, but she was used to seeing brown heroin in Los Angeles. She thought it was another drug, cocaine. Because of this mistake, she overdosed the first time she used heroin. This was a warning sign, but she did not stop. Heroin quickly became the most important thing in her life. She spent her days getting high or trying to find more drugs. She and her friends once snorted around 150 capsules of heroin in just 1 week. That is a shocking amount of drugs for such a short time. If she did not have heroin, she would get very sick. The pain was so bad that she could not think about anything else. She said she spent most of her time either being sick or searching for more heroin. Only a small part of her time was spent actually feeling high. Even singing, which she was so good at, was not as important to her as heroin. She only worked so she could make money for drugs.
You had a quote, "I was a fool, smart enough to know I was a fool, dumb enough not to care. Now that's a real fool."
Her addiction became well known. People who met her could see that she was in trouble. Some people felt sorry for her because she was young and had so much talent. Instead of talking about her music, many compared her to another famous singer, Billie Holiday. But the sad part was that they compared them because of drugs, not their beautiful voices. Her addiction overshadowed her success.
The Rolling Stones called you the last red hot soul mama.
The last of the red hot soul mamas, huh?
To keep up with her drug habit, Etta James did illegal things. She needed money to buy heroin, so she started writing bad checks. A bad check is when someone writes a check knowing there is no money in the bank to cover it. At first, she wrote bad checks to get quick cash, but later, she and a friend named Esther Phillips came up with a bigger plan. They went to hotels and wrote personal checks, making it seem like they were paying for their stay. But before the hotel could realize the checks would bounce, they left with the money. This plan did not last long. One day, the police caught her with a checkbook. She was arrested and sent to jail. She spent some time locked up on an island prison. After she was released, she traveled to another city hoping for a fresh start. But she fell into the same bad habits. Again, she was arrested, this time not just for writing bad checks, but also for having drugs. She was sent to a different jail, and this one was terrible. She later wrote about it, saying it felt like a dungeon from the past, dark and scary. Her arrests did not stop there. Once, she was performing on stage at a famous jazz club when the police walked in. Right in the middle of her show, they arrested her in front of everyone. It was humiliating, but by then people were not surprised. She was known as a drug addict, and her troubles followed her everywhere. Her life was spinning out of control, and the law was catching up with her. After being caught again for writing bad checks, a judge gave her a choice. She could go to prison or she could go to rehab to get help. She chose rehab, hoping it would help her get clean, but the place she was sent to was not kind.
For my joy, pain.
Rehab was supposed to help people, but it was also very harsh. The staff treated her badly. They forced her to wear a diaper and a baby bonnet. She had to eat from a baby bottle like a child. It was meant to punish her, but it also made her feel ashamed. They also made her scrub toilets and floors with a toothbrush. She later said this was the lowest point in her life. When Etta James decided to go to rehab for the first time, her friend and co-founder of Chess Records, Leonard, Chess booked her into Stern's convalescent home in Harvey, Illinois. And because her doctor thought it was better for James to taper off heroin rather than go cold turkey, he arranged for John Lewis to get heroin for James for her first few days in rehab. James continued to use heroin for a few days, but by the 5th day it became clear that withdrawal symptoms weren't the only thing that she had to worry about. On her 5th day in rehab, James found herself almost completely paralyzed and only able to communicate with her eyes. The doctors diagnosed her with tetanus, which she'd contracted from an infected needle, and her experience became a brutally painful physical ordeal. Her condition was so dire that her doctor tried to slap her to keep her conscious and not seizing. James almost fell into a coma, and at one moment her body started snapping and curling and bending over backward, going through all kinds of ungodly contortions, per Rage to Survive.
The book is a fabulous book. It is called Rage to Survive, Etta James, the new CD.
Taken to Michigan Hospital in Chicago, James managed to survive, and in doing so, became only the 2nd person in the state of Illinois to have survived tetanus. But although James left the hospital and rehab healthy and sober, she relapsed the day she returned to New York from Illinois when she ran into Lewis. Despite the suffering, she stayed in rehab for nearly 2 years. During that time, she wrote a song about how she was feeling. It was a sad song because she felt trapped and hopeless. But she stayed strong and managed to get clean. However, staying clean was not easy. At a Christmas party, she drank vodka. This broke the rules of rehab. If she stayed, she would have to shave her head and lose all her privileges. She didn't want to go through that, so she left. Even after rehab, her struggles were not over. Later in life, she developed another addiction, this time to painkillers. She had taken them for a back injury, but they became another problem. This led to even more health issues. She also got a serious bacterial infection and had to be hospitalized. As she got older, she was diagnosed with a disease that affected her memory. She struggled with both her mind and body failing her. Her son believed that her drug use over the years had made things worse.
Present to you your first Grammy Award. Best Jazz Vocal Performance, 1994. Mystery Lady, songs of Billie Holiday, Miss Etta James.
Etta James was one of the greatest singers of all time, but her life was full of struggles. She had talent. She had a voice that could touch people's hearts, but she also had a lot of problems. One of the biggest problems in her life was her manager, John Lewis. A manager is supposed to help an artist, guide them, and protect them. But Lewis was a bad influence. He did book shows for Etta James, which helped her career, but he also did something terrible. He gave her drugs. Instead of keeping her away from trouble, he brought more trouble into her life. Etta James and John Lewis had a difficult relationship. Sometimes they got along, but other times they fought badly. One time, during a heated argument, Etta told Lewis, "You work for me. I can fire you." She thought she had control over him, but she was wrong. Lewis did something shocking. He threatened to send her to jail. Etta thought he was just saying that to scare her, but he meant it. He secretly hid heroin in their house and called the police, telling them exactly where to find it. The police searched the house, found the drugs, and arrested Etta for having heroin. It was a serious charge, and she could have gone to prison. But in the end, the case was thrown out because the police had searched the house illegally. Even though Etta James knew that Lewis had betrayed her, she still continued working with him. She still did drugs with him. Their relationship was unhealthy, but she couldn't seem to break free. Later, when she tried to get sober, she stayed away from him for a while. But when she ran into him again after rehab, he was still using drugs. Instead of staying strong, Etta fell back into addiction. She watched him snort heroin in front of her, and she couldn't resist. That moment led to another relapse, making it even harder for her to stay clean. Etta James had many hit songs, but despite her success, she was often cheated out of money. Record companies took advantage of her, just like they did to many black artists. She recorded so many great songs, but she was not paid what she deserved. She was overcharged for different things, and she ended up owing a huge amount of money. No matter how many songs she recorded, she was always in debt. The music business was supposed to reward her, but instead, it trapped her in financial struggles. She had a close relationship with Leonard Chess, who owned Chess Records. But even though she worked with him for years, she never made any money from her music with that company. In fact, instead of getting paid, she ended up owing hundreds of thousands of dollars. That debt stayed with her for years and made her life much harder. It wasn't just money that was taken from her. She was also robbed of credit for her own work. Johnny Otis helped her in the early days of her career, but he also took advantage of her. He added his name as a co-writer on her song Roll With Me, Henry. Even though he didn't actually help write it, he made money from the song while Etta James struggled to get what she was owed. One of the only times she successfully fought back was when her song The Wallflower, Roll With Me, Henry, was used in a movie. The film studio used her song without paying her, and she had enough of being cheated. This time she got a lawyer and fought for her rights. She made a deal with the record company, and for once, she won. It was a rare victory for her in an industry that had treated her unfairly for so long. Etta James had a difficult life from the start. She escaped an abusive home when she was young, but even as an adult, she kept finding herself in abusive relationships. She once said that many people stay in bad relationships because of fear. She admitted that she was one of those people. Fear controlled her, and it kept her in situations that hurt her. One of her worst relationships was with a man she called the pimp. He was cruel, both physically and emotionally. He hurt her many times, and her manager, John Lewis, was so worried that he even gave her a gun for protection. But a gun didn't stop the pimp from beating her. He hit her so badly that she had bruises and cuts all over her face. Even after all that, she was scared to leave him. But she did take action. She pressed charges against the pimp, even though he threatened her. She was tired of living in fear. It's not clear if he was ever punished, but at least she tried to stand up for herself. One of her most famous songs, I'd Rather Go Blind, was deeply personal. She once said that it reflected her own life. She was blind when it came to love. She stayed in bad relationships even when she knew they were hurting her. Just like the song says, she didn't want to be free. She felt trapped, and she didn't know how to escape.
Feel the tears that was on my face.
Etta James was introduced to the Nation of Islam by her mother, Dorothy. Dorothy sometimes attended meetings and told Etta about the teachings, but Etta was mostly raised by her grandparents, who were Baptists. As she grew older, she became curious about the Nation of Islam and started attending meetings herself. She liked what she heard and felt proud of her race. When Etta moved to Harlem, she joined Malcolm X's temple and took the name Jamesetta X. She spent a lot of time with Malcolm X and looked up to him. She also met a young boxer named Cassius Clay. She introduced him to the teachings of the Nation of Islam. Later, he became a follower and changed his name to Muhammad Ali. Etta said she considered herself a Muslim for about 10 years, but she admitted she didn't follow all the rules of the religion. She later said that joining the Nation of Islam was more like a trend or something popular at the time. Etta James became famous with her music, especially her album At Last. She was one of the first celebrities to be linked to the Nation of Islam. She passed away in 2012 after battling leukemia. Etta James was upset with Beyoncé and later faced health problems.
Yeah, how do you stay looking so fabulous?
I don't know. Maybe because Beyoncé came along and I'm trying to keep up with her.
Etta James was not happy when Beyoncé sang her song At Last for President Obama.
At last.
During a show in Seattle, she said some harsh words about Beyoncé. She was angry that someone else was singing her song on such an important day. She even joked that Beyoncé should get punished for it. Etta also said she didn't like Beyoncé and thought she had no right to sing that song. People were surprised by her words because Beyoncé had played Etta in a movie before. But later, Etta's son explained that she was not thinking clearly because of her health problems. As Etta got older, her health became worse. She had a serious illness that made her weak. Her condition was hard on her and her family. She was taken to the hospital, where doctors tried to help her, but she did not recover. She passed away peacefully. Her husband was in charge of her care and made sure she was looked after properly. Her fans were heartbroken when they heard the news. Her funeral was held in California. Many people came to say goodbye. The famous Reverend Al Sharpton spoke at the funeral. Two famous singers, Stevie Wonder and Christina Aguilera, sang songs to honor her. They wanted to show love and respect for her amazing music. Etta was later buried in Los Angeles. Even after her death, people still remember her music. She was a strong woman with a powerful voice, and her songs will never be forgotten. Etta James had a deep and strong voice that mixed different styles of music. She brought R&B and rock and roll together in a way that made her special. Her voice was full of emotion and she sang with power. People loved how she could sing blues, jazz, and gospel, making every song feel real. Her singing won her many awards. She was honored for her blues and jazz music and was recognized as one of the best female singers. Many people in the music industry respected her talent. She was known for putting deep feeling into every song she performed. Etta James was not just a singer, she was a legend. She was added to important music halls of fame and received Lifetime Achievement Awards. These honors showed how much she changed the music world. Her songs touched people's hearts, and her voice was unforgettable. Music experts and magazines also praised her. She was named one of the greatest singers and artists ever. Her voice was strong, full of soul, and had a unique style. She didn't just sing, she told stories through her music. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame called her one of the greatest voices of her time. She inspired many artists and will always be remembered as a queen of blues and soul. Her music will live on forever.